Welcome to the Encephalitis Podcast. My name is Prav and I'm from Encephalitis International. Today we'll be talking about relationships after encephalitis. Relationships sit at the intersection of our personal and professional lives, shaping our identity, providing support during times of isolation, and often significantly transformed after encephalitis. To find out more, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Giles Yeates. Dr. Giles Yeates is a consultant clinical neuropsychologist with over 20 years of experience in neuro rehabilitation. He has worked in internationally renowned NHS services in the UK, that's National Health Services, such as the Community Head Injury Service, Aylesbury, and the Oliver Zangwill Centre, Cambridgeshire. With an additional background in Chinese martial arts, Dr. Yeates applies these practices to address physical and psychological needs. Currently, he partners with charities on web-based resources, chairs the Thames Valley UK Acquired Brain Injury Forum, and serves as an Centre of Movement, Occupational and Rehabilitation Services. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Yeates. Welcome to the Encephalitis Podcast.
Thank you, Prav.
So to get to our first question, many people affected by encephalitis talk about feeling like a different person after the illness. Could you tell us about how this sense of changed identity impacts them?
It's a huge existential challenge, right? Um, Having a very altered sense of self, embodied self, identity in the continuity of your life. I would say that as a clinician, when I hear about altered identity or personality change, I hear about that first from significant others before the survivor, actually, and I think that's a clue to how to understand it. Because I think it's about disconnection within relationships. So it could be for the survivor, a disconnection to their sense of their former self before the illness or injury, um, alongside a disconnection to close others as well.
Yeah, and a lot of our own identity is sort of in part due to the people we interact with. And if those
Right,
interactions change, who are we at the end of that?
exactly.
Um, a lot of people also talk about feeling isolated. Is this also part of to do with this kind of change?
Yeah, I think the studies have shown that social isolation increases for the person with a brain injury, or encephalitis or other causes, and for the immediate family. And that increases in year 1 to 5 post onset of the condition. Um, and I see it as a kind of like the fallout zone of the explosion, the social explosion, right?
Mm,
That I think because of maybe changes how people are with other people, lack of understanding um, um, by others around the survivor, that people fall away. A loss of place in communities, people in kind of different layers, like layers of an onion, people fall away, leaving the survivor themselves and immediate family who maybe have kind of no choice, and maybe have the understanding to know what's going on. So I think it's a social isolation for people in the immediate family. Um, and there's really interesting stuff around that, and there's been really interesting stuff on loneliness after brain injury. Um, and there's different types of loneliness have been drawn attention to as well. Not just feeling lonely because no one's around you, but feeling particularly lonely amongst the crowd when you're surrounded by people who don't understand your experience. You could be surrounded by people in your life, but feeling at your most loneliest. And I think that's been a really important observation, understanding by researchers to understand that kind of experience of survivors, that it's not just about who's in your life, but it's the quality of those relationships, how people are understanding, how you're experiencing yourself alongside others.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think what makes it so difficult to kind of address is the fact that it is qualitative, and you mentioned it's an existential crisis. I mean, in your experience, what strategies have proven effective in helping families understand this?
Well, I think with the personality change, what's really helped me is to change change how it's viewed. So traditionally, personality change is described as relating to the survivor, the individual, as if it's something that's just happened in their head. But when you look at it more closely, when you're working with these issues, you have to ask yourself who is the beholder of the personality change? Who is observing the personality change? And it's loved ones, significant others, right? So the focus, the kind of zooming into, oh, this personality change has happened to this person in their head, is to miss what's happening between the person and those close to them. Um, and that view never leads you to ask important questions like, who else has had their personality change? Many relatives, many partners of survivors say they feel like they're different people too. Um, and the traditional way of viewing it doesn't actually acknowledge that personalities, often it's not fixed, that personalities come and go, that there maybe many of your viewers and listeners might know moments where the old person seems to be back for a moment, and then they're gone again. Or they seem to be more like their old self with other groups of people, maybe often in a kind of formal, speaking to other people in a formal role. And then when the doors close, behind closed, and that coming and going is also really, really important to know about. And this idea is two-way personality change for the survivor and significant others. And I think when you put all of that together, and this is the perspectives I picked up from my couples and family work, when we're actually talking routinely about personality change, when you put all that together, it kind of puts a different view, a different lens on the whole thing. And it's about connection between people. It's to experience a different person or loss of someone once known, the emergence of a stranger, is actually a loss of familiarity between people and a loss of connection. So then, following all of that, um, it's about how do you re-establish connection? How do you make people feel familiar or understandable to each other, feel thought about to each other? It may not be the same connection as there was before, it may not be the same person, but can you re-establish continuity so that as a couple or as a family, um, reconnection is supported and people are moving forward in a way that is meaningfully connected to how they were before, if not the same? I hope that makes sense. I think the important thing is if you just view personality changes happening inside someone's head, disconnected from the relationships around, you're not helping anyone, let alone the survivor. If you're understanding identity and personality as part of relationships and connections between people in like a tapestry of social connection, then you can work on how to bind those connections and support those connections together. It could be through, I mean, practically now, it could be supporting people to do things they used to do or to participate in a different way in things that meaningfully connected people. It could be supporting conversations and interactions where people check in on each other more and um, ask questions, find out about what people need from each other. These are the kind of things that we might do in couples work, getting people back on the radar of each other again.
Amazing. Yeah, there's so much there. I mean, yeah, it seems like personality change, we need to kind of view it in a context. There's so many
Mm.
different variables outside of even the individual. And one of the things you mentioned is the sort of need to kind of look at the kind of long-term aspects of this. I mean, does treatment, do you think, need to kind of adapt to not just the short-term change after a brain injury, but in the months and years? ahead, considering this dynamic personality, for example?
Yeah, I mean that's only ever been my work. I've only ever worked with people typically at least a year post-injury and right the way to 5, 10, 20, 30 years post-injury. So that's all I've always worked in the community, so that has been my work. I know the kind of acute care and post-acute rehab get a lot of attention, but actually it's the in my work supporting people in their lived lives, in their relationships with partners, family, friends, community, work roles. This is the longer term and the longer game of rebuilding roles and connections and meaningful activities, and that's the rebuilding of lives, right? And that's the stuff that's the only bit I've actually ever known as a clinician. Um, I think
Yeah.
the kind of psychosocial aspects of uh, brain injury rehabilitation.
Yeah, yeah, definitely to bring more awareness to that as well. And kind of changing tack a little bit. Another consequence of brain injury can be changes in sexuality, which can be a decrease or an increase in arousal and desire. What options might be available in those instances?
Right. So the majority of changes when it's been researched are hyposexual changes. So that's a reduction in libido, arousal, um, sexual expression, participation, either as an individual or with a sexual partner. So everything is reducing for the most people, and that is an uneasy um, bedfellow, to pardon the fun, with a tendency for clinicians and people not to ask about changes in sexuality. So everything is reducing, no one's asking about it. So it this kind of overdetermines this death of sexual lives unnecessarily. Um, so getting the first thing that needs to happen is getting that back on the conversation with people, right? So checking if people want to talk about it. Of course, not everyone wants to, but again, the research shows that more people want to be asked about it than not be asked. So checking in if there are changes, if it's important. And then you have a kind of from that point on, you've got a range of support options. First, kind of education, understanding what changes are there. I'm doing some work with Coventry Uni at the minute where we're building an online interactive resource around sexuality changes after brain injury. And the aim of that is to make that accessible and widespread to people so they can get information about that and connect with other people who've experienced something similar. So education is really important. Often having conversations with your prescribing clinician is really important because there are direct consequences of brain injury, like encephalitis, on sexuality, but often there are indirect side effects of the medication that people are taking. Often anti-epilepsy medication, pain medication, antidepressant medication. So these things can all kind of dull down libido. So having an exploration with your prescribing clinician about are there side effects here that are affecting any changes, any reduction in sexual experience is something to explore. Again, the research shows that a big kind of factor here is loss of self-identity and image, low mood, depression. So again, working on supporting emotional well-being might be an important step towards supporting the flourishing of sexuality again. Um, and then, moving from the individual, you've got supporting. How then do you support um, people to resume sexual lives with other people again, supporting sexual partners, and that's where you may be getting into both kind of social support, but also specific couples and psychosexual counselling. And unfortunately, there's not much of that about in for survive, in brain injury specific services and things like that, unfortunately. But it is developed. There are more and more people experiencing that, more and more people training in these areas, who are already clinicians working in this area. So hopefully, in years to come, there'll be more specialized support, more widely available for sexuality. But that's the majority of people. There's a reduction in aspects of sexuality, and then there's a smaller subgroup where there is hypersexual changes, where there's an increase um, in sexual response, in sexual arousal, in the experience of sexual thoughts during times of the day where people don't want to have those, or with people where they don't want to have those in their mind when they're doing other things with certain people. So again, that requires, some special psychological support, I think. And again, there are prescription. There are psychopharmacological interventions that might help in reducing libido that I know neuropsychiatrists might use to support someone with hyper increased sexual libido post-injury.
And then moving forward to professional relationships, could you talk about the process of returning to work after experiencing encephalitis?
Yeah, return to work. It's a really complex process, and it's one of my areas of work, and it's generally a neglected area. I I think a lot of where support is there, a lot of support goes into getting people into a work role, be it paid or voluntary, and then there is less support to support the retention of that role over time. And there can be lots of challenges. First of all, there's that understanding of other people, other work colleagues, uh, managers, line managers, bosses. That understanding's not there. The motivation to understand is completely different. People are there to go to work. They might not be interested in understanding changes for one work colleague in the way that clinicians would or family would. So that's quite a unique context to think about how you support that. Um, what I would say is that often the challenges to retaining a work role are often social. Again, so people might be able to do the work role. Um, but when it comes to like navigating office politics or um, chats in the break time, this is where often problems come up. Something might a social boundary might be transgressed, or something inappropriate might be said, and then really hard for a line manager to know what to do with and then to view that as a disability related issue. That can be really difficult. Um, so having, and often within work roles, there is um, a subtle gradation of formality. Like, within one workplace, you might have to be really formal to one person, less so to another person. You might have a boss that's quite informal versus a very formal boss. How you might be with customers or client might be different to how you were with um, work colleagues who you don't know very well, who you've known for a long time. Without realizing, we're constantly shifting how we are with people in a workplace. And those shifts of gear are really hard to navigate for many people with encephalitis and other forms of brain injury. And I think that can often lead to problems where the wrong kind of formality setting is in action for people, and can lead to these kind of social challenges in the workplace as well.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, now that I think about it, I guess every relationship is sort of in a gradation, as you say. How can we navigate all of that? We're always a different person, even with family, even with a partner.
Right, totally.
Yeah, thank you for that. There is sometimes I did want to ask this question, which is about your experience in Chinese martial arts and how you bring that into your practice. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit different to the other stuff, but yeah. Independent. Alongside my work as a psychologist, I've always studied martial arts, both Chinese and Indian martial arts actually, and I have done a lot of training in China on a mountain with Taoist monks who are Kung Fu masters.
Wow.
Have you heard of the hip hop group, the Wu-Tang Clan?
Yes.
Well, they named themselves after the original Wu-Tang Clan is this group of Kung Fu monks. And I'm a disciple, so I am actually officially in the Wu-Tang Clan, which is quite cool.
Oh, brilliant.
But I can't spit many rhymes, but my martial arts skills are all right. So that's been another love alongside my career. And then it all started when I just happened to come across an article on Tai Chi for brain injury, and the way it was being described was to me as a Tai Chi and practitioner was missing the point completely of what Tai Chi does. And so that then started me a process actually. What can I bring as a psychologist and a Tai Chi Kung Fu practitioner and teacher, um, in terms of integrating it. And the main idea for that is around getting into a state of flow that a lot of people after encephalitis and other brain injuries can feel disconnected and fragmented in pieces, right? Um, and that there's a really so going back to that kind of how can you support altered states of self in altered bodily experiences and all that. If you're feeling in pieces, you can't easily be put back together. And I thought, when I do a talking therapy, again, can't get close to that. It's kind of like it'd be like getting a sellotape and sticking it back together, but the pieces are all still apart, right? Um, Whereas if you imagine kind of leaves in a stream or a river, that are all getting moved at the same time by a current or an eddy, right? They're all in pieces, but they're all being moved by something bigger than themselves, a bigger force. Um, and that's where something like Tai Chi comes in. When you're moving and breathing to a specific sequence of movement, um, you you are part of something bigger than yourself. And if you're doing that with other people in the group, you're again part of something bigger than yourself. Kind of like a murmuration of starlings or a shoal of fish. You're all moving as one. And of course, there are invitations there for a spiritual perspective on being moved by a greater force in the universe, depending on what you believe, right? So this is where this stuff goes. And then our research has been seeing, okay, um, to be in this state of flow, you need the right kind of movements that are accessible to you. And every survivor encephalitis has a different range of needs and abilities, right? So one movement will work for them and not for the others. But the idea of being in a state of flow is where you're in a perfect fit from the challenge of what you're trying to do, but it's accessible enough to do it. So it's kind of like you need to find your own doorway to the same location, the same kind of inner garden of flow state. So a lot of my work has been using adapted forms of Tai Chi, and I know I've got colleagues who do the same with yoga as well, to get people moving and breathing and relaxing, um, using moves that are right for them. And they all get to the same place of feeling connected, fluid, more so than they would do normally. And this strange kind of mixture of feeling relaxed but energized at the same time, which the Chinese would call qi. Or in India, it would be called prana. There's this kind of whole ancient technology of energy cultivation through movement and breath. And given that fatigue is such a huge consequence of different forms of brain injury, and clinicians are still searching around for different approaches to managing fatigue. I think these approaches and where fatigue has been studied as a measure for evaluating Tai Chi and yoga and things after the brain injury, the data holds up that actually this stuff does have a positive impact. So yeah, it's a lovely aspect of my work, and I think one of the things where more people should do it. It's a kind of thing where to, if you're a survivor of encephalitis and you want to go along to a local Tai Chi group, it may not be a class, it may not be a great experience because of accessibility issues or learning needs because of cognitive changes and things like that. So I think it's kind of thing where clinicians, people supporting survivors, adding on to their toolbox of skills, some Tai Chi work. And I know increasingly more physiotherapists, occupational therapists, and psychologists like me who have these practices and bringing that into their own rehab work is a interesting direction for the future.
That's brilliant. Wow. I've learned a lot there. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Welcome.
And it's so interesting to kind of just hear about how it comes into your practice as well. And I was just wondering, what what's most exciting to you right now about your day to day and your practice, and where do you see things going?
Um, I have in more recent times, if you'd asked me this like 5, 10 years ago, I would be telling you about all of the different clinical and academic projects that I'd be up to, and some are still going. But I've tried to learn from survivors of encephalitis and others in terms of shaping my own life. And one of the things, going back to that identity, is that you need to have multiple eggs in your basket that define who you are. And if you define yourself only through your job, and if that can get taken away by a sudden life event, that's huge. Whereas people who have multiple eggs have other strands of their identity to draw upon. They're more resilient in the face of sudden changes where one might be altered or lost. So in recent years, I've actually been trying to do a little bit less psychology and more of the martial arts and the well-being stuff. So what was exciting for my life now is the balance of all of that. And we are actually here in Brookes doing some planning to do some brain injury imaging studies of Tai Chi and scan my masters in China doing Tai Chi and seeing what the brain looks like in states of flow and Tai Chi. So that's kind of fun. That's what I do on a Friday, and some links to China there. And constantly we're trying to develop new approaches to psychological support, new approaches to therapy that help people with different kinds of disabilities. For example, if you have aphasia, a talking-based therapy is going to be limited to you, right? So that constant way of finding out how can we provide an emotionally supportive experience that's accessible to people with different needs. So that's an ongoing thing that's exciting, but I'm trying to do it in more of a balanced way in terms of my personal life these days.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That does bring us to the end. And I was just wondering, just before we close, is there anything that we've not discussed that you'd like to mention? I know we've talked a range of different types of relationships. Is there anything you'd like to kind of bring in just before we finish?
Um, I think it is one of the most fundamental aspects of life after encephalitis and ranges, the changes in relationship. Often brain injury services are focused only on the individual. So I'd say, you know, go together to appointments and bring the story of how it's affected your relationship, that space between you as a family or as a couple. Bring that to the awareness of the services that are supporting you. I think third sector charities services are more orientated to this than NHS services, unfortunately, in this day and age. So finding someone who can, or maybe a group of people who can work together to support you as a couple or a family or a group of friends or whatever, and that might be a partnership, late counsellor or something like that. While there's still so few specialist couples therapy or family therapy practitioners within your rehab, that's still a way away, unfortunately. But it might be about getting different people connected with you to support you to find a way back to each other, basically.
Lovely. Thank you. That does bring us to the end of this podcast with Dr. Yates. Thank you, Dr. Yates, for sharing your expertise and your time with us. We're very grateful. Thank you.
Welcome.
And I'd like to thank you, the audience, for listening and watching. We hope you have found this episode of the Encephalitis podcast helpful. If you have been affected by any of the issues raised, wherever you live in the world, please contact our support services. Encephalitis International is here to help in whatever way we can. For more information and our contact details, please visit our website www.encephalitis.info, and together we can achieve our aim of ending death and disability from encephalitis. You can also find all the information you need in the podcast description. As always, if you can support our work, we would be extremely grateful. Please visit www.encephalitis.info/donate. Thank you again, and see you next time on the Encephalitis Podcast.